The event finance process of course starts with the submitter building an event inside the VMS, and optionally working with one of the finance reps for their region depending on where they are geographically. As soon as there's any type of funding involved, it's going to also show up on the finance check regional views that are listed inside of the VMS under the view dropdowns. The regional finance check is located under events, and then by choosing the finance check-regional territorial from the drop-down menu. This view is specifically designed for the regional or territorial people to see anything that requires funding at a glance. So they'll have the event name, the status of it, which could include drafts, really any status. They'll see the event start date, they'll see the total of how much has been requested, whether or not PEX has been funded yet or not, who the event lead is, and then of course what the overall status of that event is, or the actual approval status. At some point when the submitter believes it's ready, they will mark it for approval, which would start the overall event approval process. That also would send an email to anybody listed as a finance representative for that particular event. The next step is whether or not the event gets approved, and if not, of course there's no tasks for finance at that point. The next step in the process is for the system to look at whether or not there's any PEX funding required. Inside the actual finance form inside the event, there's a number of different categories of funding. For national finance, their primary concern is whether or not there's any PEX funding requested. If not, then there's nothing else for them to do, and in fact, the event likely won't even show up on their radar. If there is PEX funding required, then an email is going to go out automatically to national finance, which will show them that there is something that they need to fund. It will also show up on the national view for finance check, which is a little bit different than the regional view. The National Finance Check is found in the same drop-down menu by choosing Finance Check-National Events. This particular view is constrained to only show events which have been approved and or published. We have the event name, whether or not the PEX is funded yet. We have the PEX funding total, but no other totals because National is really only looking at PEX funding. We have the funding dates and the event start date. Over to the right, we have the additional location information in case they want to be able to filter it down. And the overall design is for them to be able to come to the dashboard, look at the event start date, and then fund the events that have been approved that are getting close to the event start date. And of course, you can optionally lock the PEX funding down if you have the correct permissions so that once the request has gone to National, we can lock it so that there's no other changes made. Last but not least, once National does their external process to fund the PEX cards, they would go into the event and mark it as funded, potentially leave a note, and then that will ultimately flag the overall event as being funded. At that point, there's nothing else in the National or in the event finance process, unless there is an emergency funding requested, which is covered in a different video.